So in this segment, we're going to be talking about a statement from Gordon Brown, which is unbelievable. Nurses are relying on food banks, and do you know what? I agree with the former Prime Minister. It is absolutely insane that nurses have to be reliant on food banks. You know how difficult, in the words of Santander, is it to care for a person that cares for a person, and it goes beyond nurses. Well, it goes to a lot of the care staff that we have in the country that essentially keep the healthcare system together. So Gordon Brown has demanded an end to Food Bank Britain and said nurses should not be relying on handouts, essentially relying on charity when it's the government that sorts out the pay for the for NHS nurses, and it should be increased. They've had below inflation pay rises for the last decade now. It's not just them, it is all firefighters, police officers as well. But I think for nurses it kind of hits differently when they're the ones that when you're in trouble, when you're ill, these are the people that could be looking after you. He said thousands of nurses report that because of the cost of living crisis, they're skipping meals so they can feed their children. And of course, some of them live in London, for example, or Manchester, really expensive cities to live in. Gordon Brown said, I want an end to Food Bank Britain by putting an end to poverty and low pay Britain. This is not a party political issue, but a humanitarian issue, a matter of common decency. And that's important that he's kind of trying to put the issue above politics, above ordinary party politics, and trying to put it as an issue of morality, where the government has to act because, if they don't, they are immoral, which the government are. The best way we can reward the nurses, said Gordon Brown, for what they did for us during the pandemics, ensuring decent wages and working conditions. It's not just the nurses though. I want to see it for all care staff. Our nurses cared for us. It's time for us to care for them. According to Nursing Note, 6 NHS trusts have set up food banks or developed food voucher schemes to help their staff cope with the cost of living. It's just madness to me that you have 6 trusts so far. We don't know how many more are gonna do this. Inflation's around near the double-digit mark. How are people supposed to cope with that below inflation increase? I think the most the government offered is like 3% to nurses as well. They don't make a ton of money. The ones, especially on the lower bands, don't make a ton of money. Staff retention is also really bad. These are people who, once they start a shift, they are already understaffed. In suffering a lot of burnout here, and some of them, have been diagnosed with PTSD. Some of them have PTSD from the pandemic because they saw a lot of people die. And this is the way the country treats them. The government can bang on about the amount of nurses it trains, but the simple fact is staff retention's the most important thing, and we're not retaining nurses very well. A lot of them, they might leave to go to other countries where they'll get paid and treated better. Some of them will just leave the profession entirely. A profession they worked hard to get to. Gordon Brown said 2 years ago the NHS deservedly awarded the George Cross, I'm not familiar with that award, for its work during the pandemic, but the reward for individual nurses has been pay settlements way below inflation, leaving nurses much worse off, which 100% I agree with him that this is such a bad situation. That's all they've gotten. He says, I say all nurses should be lining up to receive their Jubilee medals, but instead it's almost unbelievable that this is the case in the 5th richest economy in the world. I think we're 7th or 6th now. Today, too many nurses are lining up at food banks. I hate the idea of nurses doing long shifts, then having to leave their beds of their patients to queue up for food parcels. That's an absolutely harrowing image, that you've got people who are very qualified having to deal with complex illnesses. Essentially, it won't just be them, it'll be the other medical professionals, the ones that have higher qualifications also helping, but nurses are the backbone for the healthcare service. Surely as a country we didn't come all this way to end up in the year 2022 with food banks, bedding banks, baby banks and clothes banks replacing the welfare state as our last line of defence against poverty and low pay, which is true that essentially charity has had to step in where the government should be functioning here. And these are people that are working incredibly long hours. For anyone who claims that I just work more, they're working very difficult jobs. Working in a job where people die is very difficult. I can't imagine how hard that is. And the simple fact is nurses in this country don't get the respect they deserve. It's just a crazy situation we have right now. Just medical professionals across the board, there's such a lack of them. It's just wild to me. He goes, last month the Royal College of Nursing president told MPs the nursing sector had a critical issue with retention. Dr. Denise Chafer said we can't get away from the fact of the low pay issue. We have nurses that are unable to pay their rent, afford their petrol to get to work. They're unable to get a mortgage. We've spoken to a number of members that just cannot get a mortgage, that they're relying on food banks. Clearly, pay is the obvious critical issue. And if we did respect them, right, that's why the government said they're heroes, because these are heroes treated. They make sacrifices. They may be the closest things we get to actual heroes, but they're not. They're human beings just like us, and they deserve to be treated a lot better. If anyone says, "Oh, but there were food banks under Labour," if we look at the actual rates here of the emergency food, the number of people receiving 3 days worth of emergency food by the Trussell Trust food banks, right, and this is just one organisation. They're the biggest ones, though. I think if you look at under the worst bit of Labour, which would have been 2009, 2010, it's about 40,000 people who received emergency food parcels, which is wrong. That should never have happened under Labour. But if you look how quickly the Tories scale up these numbers, it's just crazy. You got a massive increase of double, really. You got double 2011-12, and then you've got probably around triple 2012-13, and it just keeps going up. From 346,000 one year to almost 1 million the next year. Then you've got consistently over 1 million from 2015 to now, and it goes up to 2 million in 2020-21. Sorry, not 2 million, 2.5 million. 2020, 2021, and then 21-22 it's gone down to 2.1 million. That's the country we live in, and that will only get higher as the cost of living crisis continues to get worse and worse. And it makes me furious, that medical professionals are being treated like this. Honestly, why would you stay in this profession? Honestly, genuine question. If there are any nurses who watch my videos, right, why stay in this profession when you're not respected properly? Every shift you go into, you're understaffed, and you're not respected. You're not paid what you should be paid. Why would anyone stay in such a profession? Honestly, you can say, "Oh, it's a calling" and all this stuff. Like, calling doesn't pay the bills. Calling won't get you a mortgage. It won't feed your kids either. What will is money, and the simple fact is they don't make enough. And once the rubber hits the road, once more people start leaving, once the NHS starts to crumble even further, you've got 13-hour waits in one of the A&Es. 13 hours. That's insane to me. Waiting that long for emergency care, I can't even. But anyways, shouts out Gordon Brown for shedding some light on the issue. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Be respectful, like, comment, share, subscribe. Especially if you're a nurse, I want to hear from you. Support the channel on Patreon if you can, and hopefully I'll see you in the next one.